Welcome to this episode of the podcast where we are, or I am, interviewing the wonderful Emelia Thompson, PhD. Welcome, Emilia.
Thank you so much. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm very good. It's an interesting time, personally. We won't go into that. We talked about that beforehand. We haven't got time to delve into that. I'm sure you're doing well as well, I would imagine.
Thriving, thriving.
Thriving. I like to hear thriving. It's all good. So, as I mentioned to Media before we hit record, these episodes are delving into the journey that people have been on to build their online businesses. So we're going to delve into how Emilia came to be how should we describe it? Social media mogul, the
Oh,
all
shit.
all conquering queen of nutrition. I don't know. I feel like you need some sort of, you know, elevated name, like you've got your glucose goddess or something like that. You need your own sort of elevated name, I feel.
Yeah, I feel like social media mogul is the farthest away you could possibly get to describe me, but I'm going to cling to that. I might even clip that one out and own it.
There you
Because
go. Just
never happened.
as with most things on social media and most people on social media that get some success, none of it has to be truthful. So you just run with it, just say it, and it's true, right? You're the number one, you know, nutritionist and just general person on social media. There you go. Just own that.
Me. That's
Indeed.
me.
Good.
Officially, oh, thanks.
Cool. So let's get into some questions. Firstly, like obviously, by the name of your social media handle, we know that you are PhD, you're qualified up to the gills with nutrition. I'm interested though in what was the journey and the leap and the decision process to go from, okay, you've got your qualifications to now I'm going to be an online business owner. And what was that kind of like gap? What happened in that gap?
I got influenced by youngsters. That's genuinely what it is. What happened for me. I was I was teaching at the t before I went online. I was teaching full time at university. Sport nutrition. Loved my job. Loved it. Loved students. Used to have really good, strong relationships with my students. It was like my favorite part. So also dating a man who was a bit younger than me, and he was a personal trainer and had didn't like kind of dabbled online. And I was also at the same time bodybuilding. So I was in the fitness space as it
Mhm.
was. And I was very open about my journey in bodybuilding. So I kind of came from a disordered eating background, like the general woman in fitness cliche, disordered eating, bodybuilding, anti-diet, peace. Like that's the general vibe, and that's me, right? So I was in my bodybuilding era, and I kind of this was when Instagram was like it wasn't early. I didn't get onto it any early or anything, but I just remember when I was competing, I would share a lot of my stuff online. Like quite honestly, I wasn't trying to build a business. I was writing blogs about, oh, this happened to me after like competing and kind of messed up my relationship with food, and I'm finding myself binge eating. And I used to always write diaries and stuff, and it was like an online diary. I just started keeping it. And like some of my competitor friends were reading it and they were like, oh yeah, this happened to me too. No one ever says any of this stuff. And at the same time as I was doing that, some of the people I was teaching were like, why do you could have so much more impact if you worked with people rather than taught us how to work with people. Not, I don't think they were trying to get rid of me, but they were like, I remember one, like specifically with one student who's a great online coach now. And he said to me, he was like, because I worked so hard when I was like teaching, I worked really crazy hours. And he was like, you could work fewer hours and you could have much more impact. And what you have to say is so important. And he was like 21 at the time. And I think I was like 31. And I was like, oh yeah, like maybe. And then honestly, people just kind of started reading my blogs and they were asking me like, oh, do you coach? Because I would put some evidence-based stuff in there too. I talk about
Mhm.
protein and all the stuff that I knew from studying and that I used to teach in sport nutrition. And so people just kind of started saying, like, is this something you do? And I realized like there was this demand for an evidence-based person in fitness and an honest person in fitness. And both of those things I could do quite well. So then I started doing coaching on the side of it working. And then after about 6 months, I kind of built up a client base. It wasn't a big one, it was 15, 16 people in about 6 months. And then I was like, okay, I need to make a decision. Am I going to keep teaching or am I not? And I think I gave something like 6 months notice because I really kind of didn't want to leave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then I went online. So it was very natural for me. I didn't identify that's where I want to be. Let's get there. I kind of just lived my life the way that I wanted to live it. I was
Mm-hmm.
quite lucky. And then it kind of followed on from that.
Sure. And so like you've made that decision to kind of like move from teaching into coaching. And I'd assume at that point you've never run your own business before.
No.
This is all new. So what were like some of those challenges early on that I guess you figured out you learned by doing, you figured out like stuff happened, you think, okay, I've got to sort this out, or I've got to figure out how to do this. Like what were some of those like challenges you remember from way back when, if you can remember that far back?
I think for me, I just had absolutely no idea about systems. There was two key things. One is I had no idea about systems at all. The amount of money that I lost because I didn't know how to take regular payments from people. I would just be like, oh, just bank transfer me, this much. And I was recording it for tax, but I would just back record it and then I'd go back and I'd be like, oh, that person didn't pay me for 3 months. And I never even knew. And then they might not have even known. And then I felt bad because I didn't want to ask them for it. So I lost a lot of money and time. I had no systems in place in regards to client management. I would email people to say, how are things going? And they'd fill out a form and they'd send me it back. There was zero automations, and it was fine because I would be working Monday to Friday, and Saturday, Sunday was like my coaching day. So it was all dedicated to that.
Mhm.
Um, but I wasted just a shit ton of time
Mhm.
on stuff that I wouldn't even consider a thing now. It's just like, well, obviously you would just sign up for Stripe or you do
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah.
There was just no idea. And then the other thing for me was I had no, didn't really have a lot of confidence. I charged very little. I charged, I think I had an online coach the first time I did a bodybuilding show. So this was beforehand. And he charged me like 50 quid a month or something. And so then I was like, well, I'll charge 50 quid a month. And I didn't really know. I obviously didn't have experience, so I didn't want to overcharge, but like I had a PhD, I taught in this area, I had personal experience, I knew what I was doing. I offered a lot, like I built my entire method that I have now from the get-go, way beyond what was like a basic nutrition and training gym program type thing. It was way beyond that, but I had such imposter syndrome and I didn't know what I was doing. So massively undercharged, had no confidence and over delivered.
Mhm.
Um, and I think those were the main things. Yeah, those were probably the main things that I had no idea,
Mm.
what I was doing. Didn't know how to market either, because no one at that time was doing relationship with food stuff. So my boyfriend was a bodybuilder, so I used transformation pictures sometimes. And then, like to me now, I would never use transformation pictures, but I had no idea, and I had no idea what to name what I did. So I just called
Mhm.
myself like a online coach. Really, just underplayed all the other stuff that I did because nobody did it. I just didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing, to be honest. But
I
it
think we've all
worked.
been there. So
Sometimes we still are.
yeah, so I got three questions literally based on what you've just said there. And before I forget them, I'll go do them in reverse order. So one of the things you mentioned there was before and after pictures and how you shared them previously, but you wouldn't do so now. And I get why that would be the case. I get why you would do that in the beginning, and I get why you wouldn't do that now based on what I know of you and how you approach things. Having said that, a lot of marketers will talk about social proof, will talk about showing results and things like that. And in a weight loss context, which a lot of people listening to this will be coaches who don't do some form of weight loss. So, how do you approach social proof and providing evidence that you can do what you say you do if, for a valid reason, you remove the actual visual transformation away from that client story?
It's a great question, and I think I don't want to deny that it's tougher. Like it's tougher. I mentor people who are kind of coming away from transformation pictures. Some of them still sometimes use them, and they say like I just get infinitely more inquiries when I put transformation pictures up, and so I would never tell anyone not to use them. I just have a clear reason why I don't. I think this is something that I've just learned through trial and error. Realistically, my check-ins, for example, are all written. So anything that someone says, for years and years, I've screenshot them. I just started screenshotting them and saying like, oh, things clients say. I think I used to hashtag, back in the day, like things clients,
Where they were
whatever.
a thing.
Yeah, good times. Um, and so I started doing, just kind of sharing things that people would say to me because they were more evident of their relationship with food than pictures and stuff like that. Ultimately, the way that I see it is a transformation picture works because people can see the start point and the end point. They can see themselves in the start point. So they believe they can get to the end point, right? And of course, the obvious part is that you're playing into what people want, which is fat loss, or a large majority of people want is fat loss. So for me, it was like, how do I emulate that in a different context? So I might use stock images, for example, just to humanize things. So a lot of the clients that we use, we talk about their stories that are real. But we use stock images, for example. But I'll do the same thing. I'll say, this is where this person started, binge eating, struggling with their relationship with food, etc., overeating at the weekends. Today, this person said this, and it will be a quote that they've said. And then there'll be the journey of this is how they got from A to B, because that's what a transformation picture basically is. And so I would encourage, the coaches will sometimes encourage people that want to share their story. They might do video. We'll have some videos on our website and things like that where people can be reminded they're real people. The thing that I think that people struggle with a little bit here is I'll share fat loss results. I might share graphs from the portal that we use, but I take off numbers because I don't want to feel comparison to other people. So I take off numbers. Does that impact my business? Potentially. Or I'll say, this person lost this amount of weight, but it had nothing to do with dieting. These are all the things that we did, right? The struggle point that people might have is that people trust that I'm not lying. And it's taken me a very long time for people to look at what I share and know that I'm being honest. And a lot of that comes from me just being really honest about everything else that I do in life on social media. So they know that I'm not making some client up being like, this person lost 50 kilograms in 2 weeks. Like, they know that I'm not doing that. But I think that's harder when you're just starting out, and especially if you're not being authentic on social media and you don't have that trust and that buy-in from people already, you could easily be making stuff up. But I mean, I've seen someone local to me, someone sent me this screenshot where he'd asked his mate, can I buy your transformation off you? My mentors told me to buy your transformation. I'll give you like 200 quid or something for it. And I use it as my own. So it's like anyone can lie. Like anyone. And to be honest, like, yeah, anyone can lie. But you have to, I think it helps to have that trust so people know that I'm not just making up
Yeah.
Jen, for example, who might be a client of mine.
And I think for you as well, as an outsider looking in at your business, is that you have a very strong brand, and that's built around, your views about dieting, your views about disordered eating, and things like that. And the way that you've communicated that information, and the way that you have the credibility of your qualifications and your experience and all of those sorts of things. And to a small degree, I guess as well, the fact that you've got a sizable audience adds all to that trust element, so that people they get it. And like you say, is that when you're starting out, that's going to be a little bit more challenging to do. And so one of the other questions, maybe leading on from that, and something you kind of hinted at earlier, is the, like, I think I'm putting words in your mouth here, is that I would imagine you don't find it difficult to avoid what's trendy or popular or stuff like that. You strike me as someone who's very strong-minded, and you do what you want to do. And, if it fits what people want, great. If it doesn't, that's cool too. Can correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
I mean, do you know what? I'm 37 and I just like, it's not old, but I just kind of feel like I can't be arsed. I can't be arsed. I know what works.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means I'm out of date, but I own being out of date, so that's
Yeah.
fine.
I'm the same. I hit 42. I'm 40, 43 later this year. And I just got to that. I feel like I've got to a grumpy old man stage, and I literally just don't care. I open up social media and I don't care what any of you are saying. Well, pretty like 99% of people, I just don't care. Like you go on like threads and people just put these one sentences, like it's like, oh, I'll just be wowed by my one sentence of magic. I was like, I just don't care what you're saying. Um, but anyway, my question was going to be more like, I imagine that person who hasn't got brand, who hasn't got authority yet, they see like, oh, the transformation picture that works, or that really clickbaity post, that style of making a reel really works. And what advice would you give people to kind of like stay away from stuff that's potentially not good for you long term and stick with something that's a little bit more authentic?
I think it's interesting, right? Because it's a lot of these people are great coaches, for example, or business
Mhm.
owners, and if they work with clients, they'll highlight how important it is not to focus on, instant gratification, think of delayed gratification, think of long-term reward. And yet when it comes to their business, and I understand why, because it's your income, it's your
Mhm.
livelihood, like it's crucial. So I understand why you focus on that instant gratification. And I think you will always find justification for whatever you choose to do. If you want to kind of go, if you're somebody who's, for example, supports body image and relationship with food, um, transformation pictures, as an example, are always going to be questionable. They always are. And I think if it gives you a certain uncertainty when you're sharing it, then you need to learn to trust your gut. And I think with business, it's so easy to become a replica of like everyone else. Like I scrolled today and I saw two people going out of one after the other, going into the fridge to get something, saying something, and then being back at the kitchen table and then saying the next thing. And I scrolled up on it and I scrolled back down again. I was like, this is exactly the same. And it's very boring to watch. But I understand like the pull to it, but you're not going to be able to establish any sort of individual brand or be known as an authority or yourself when you could just take your head off and put someone else's head on and get the exact same content. Like
Yeah.
it comes down to your values of like, what do you value, business values, personal values. Um, and but on the flip side of that, there will be certain things where I'm not up to date with stuff, but I know, for example, okay, my engagement's a bit down. I need to do a looping reel. Okay, I'm gonna do that. Like I'm not an idiot. Like, so I think too of like,
Mhm.
yes, get out the values aligned stuff. But if something's easy and it's not misaligned for you, it's not inauthentic, there's nothing wrong with like bringing threads of it in.
Mhm.
Use a trending audio. Like that doesn't discredit you. Do a loop and reel. That doesn't discredit you. Just don't make that your entire personality because it's boring.
Yeah, and
And
I always think as well is that it's funny when you think about it, is that a lot of these coaches or people who struggle on social media will be thinking like, how do I stand out? How do I stand out? How do I get people to see my content? First port of call they go to is do the same thing that everyone else is doing. I was like, so if you wanted to stand out, probably the best thing you would do is not to do what everybody else is doing, because that by definition would be standing out in some sort of way. But it's like that natural reaction to go, I'll just do what everybody else is doing because that seems to work. But like you say as well, like there's a guy in marketing that I won't name names because we don't need to do all that. But he has these very, very I think they're just, I mean, they annoy me to no end, where it's like it have like a question, like a really intriguing headline on the screen, and just some just like random B-roll footage, which you and I make those sorts of posts all the time. But then it's like that you're waiting for this big reveal, and it's like building up, like nothing's changing, and then it's like read the caption. I was like, so you've like had me hang on for 10 seconds just to say read the caption. I'm just like, this is annoying. It's just annoying, but he gets like super high views because he's got like a massive amount of a high percentage watch time. Um, but I see people do it all the time. But to me, that's like just annoying. Like, as a
yeah,
consumer of that content, yes, your numbers are going up, but I'm not going to buy anything from you because this is
yeah.
just
And just
nuts.
like I'm a big believer in like connection economy. And if you're interested in this, like go and read Seth Godin's work on this. And I have always worked on this basis without realizing that's what I was doing. And I think for me, if I started putting out content that was really overly edited or really kind of trendy, etc., it would immediately fracture the authenticity and therefore the connection I have with people that follow me. And especially if you're doing work on people's health, they really need to feel like they can trust you.
Mm.
At least if they're going to be like long term, long term, I say consumers, maybe they consume your content for a year, then they'll maybe do your low ticket offer, then they might do, one-to-one, then they might go on to an education course. Like there's so, when it comes to that connection, you don't want to fracture it by doing like repeatedly doing these shit reels where you're like, what's it going to be? And read the caption. Like I remember having this conversation with someone who was doing, they'd followed someone who was saying, always make sure you say follow me within the first two sentences. So they'd say, oh yeah, this is the clear hook. Follow me for more if you like this. And it's a mate of mine. And I was like, I'm really sorry, but I cannot engage with any more of your content because this is pissing me off every time I see it. I know what's going to come out of your mouth. Hook, follow me, and then some, whatever content it is. And I was like, yeah, this is what I've been told to do to get engagement. And I was like, I honestly, maybe it worked. I don't think it worked because he stopped doing it.
Mm.
But I find all of that stuff very inauthentic. And I
Yeah.
think people are not stupid, you know?
For sure. And a lot of it is like one person will do it and it works. And it's like one of those things. And, it just snowballs and snowballs until it's just like everybody's doing the same sort of thing. And like, I had a similar conversation with a client of mine. And I said to him that we were reviewing some of his content. And I said, every post that I look at feels like a sales pitch. And I'm all for generating leads off of pretty much every post you make. But there's a way of doing it that doesn't feel like a sales pitch every single time. And I think like what people, when I see like that type of content, I get the sense that they've put themselves and their business at the focus of that piece of content rather than the person who's receiving it. And so it's gone from, how do I make a valuable piece of content that's going to make a difference to somebody who's maybe going to be able to take a baby step towards achieving a goal or overcoming a problem? That's now secondary to what's going to get me more views, more reach, more this, that, and the other. And I feel like people have just swung way too far the other way. And we're all now, well, I say we all, these people are all just focused on tricks rather
Yeah.
than real content. And that's a shame, really, because,
They've got great stuff to say. Like that person I was just talking about there, who I was like, I can't watch the content more. Great content, great stuff to say. Really value it. I don't want to be switched off from good value content, but and it dilutes so much the authenticity, the connection, the value of your content. And again, for the people that it works for, fantastic. But like you said, it tends to be like 1% of people that it works for, and then everyone else tries to emulate that.
Hmm.
And it doesn't have the
Yeah,
same thing.
and I've mentioned it on a couple of podcasts, but it's worth mentioning again in case people haven't heard those previous ones, is that it's worth going to look at in the insights what Instagram defines as a view. They literally, if you click the button that says, what does a view mean? A view to Instagram is 1 millisecond of watch time. A millisecond, and I Googled all of this. So it's like, well, what is a millisecond? And like a blink of an eye is 100 milliseconds. So a 1 millisecond is a view. And I wrote this in a post the other day, is like, that makes a mockery of the whole analytics itself, because I can't physically scroll past that content fast enough for it not to be a view. It's impossible. So then obviously there's watch time that goes into the algorithm and stuff like that. But these people are getting tens and hundreds of thousands of views. It could be 100,000 milliseconds. And
God,
and then so when people then say, well, I need more views, I need more views, and they create this content that is very, very short and, like blink and you miss it, read the caption, you might just be creating content that actually no one's really watching. It might Instagram, and obviously Instagram is doing it because views are these days like people's gateway drug. And if they see more views, then they make more content. And if they see more views, then they make more of that same content. But that content probably isn't going to get you leads and clients because you're not establishing connection and things like that. So it's worth digging a bit deeper as to what all of these analytics mean, because it's crazy. It's nuts.
That is interesting. Very, very interesting. I didn't know that.
There you go.
That's slightly interesting.
So think like a blink of an eye, it's 100, potentially 100 views.
Great, great. Also depressing when I think about, well, that reel only had X many views. That's like not even a blink of an eye, but that's fine.
But the other way to look at that would be that, well, maybe they were real views. Maybe, you know, actually people paid attention. Maybe people did go and read the caption, and Instagram just didn't like that fact because they just want more like milliseconds. I don't know. But anyway, go and have a look at it.
This is why I can never care about this stuff, because I'm like, I don't know. I don't understand it.
No. Well, I mean, it's interesting. Like in the 2 weeks ago, I deleted every social media app off my phone. I got to that point where every time I opened it, I was so annoyed with the world. I was just like, I just don't want it. So I deleted Instagram. I didn't even have Facebook or TikTok or Snapchat or any of those, but Threads, YouTube, all went. And what I realized is you can do it if you run a business, like different if you're doing like personal stuff, but you can run a business without any of these apps on your phone. Like you can go into the Meta Business Suite and you can upload content, you can add trending audio, you can add stories, and you can tag people. You don't have to go anywhere near the app if you don't want to. And so for me now, I don't have anything in my feed because I don't have a feed. So I don't have any distractions. But if I wanted to now go and consume some content, I feel like I'm in control. I can log on to Instagram on the desktop. I can go and say, okay, I wonder what Emilia's doing today. Oh, okay, cool. Baby. Like or whatever. And it's me now who's in control of that out. And it gives you back a lot of time because like I don't have to spend hours on, you know, social media like engaging. Which is another annoying thing. I know this is not in an interview now, it's just me ranting about social media. But one thing I noticed on Instagram the other week, before I deleted it, was that if you go and press like reply to a comment, it now gives you a suite of generic options. You can just click and say, thanks for that, you know, pray emoji hands or whatever. And I'm like, well, wasn't this social media? But now we're just saying, no, don't waste time talking to people. Just say that and move on. And it's just like, what is going on here?
I did not know that either. Maybe I need to update the app. I probably haven't updated it for about 2 years, so probably.
So I just feel like a lot of these metrics and these things that people like hang their hat on as being so important, and you know, literally like ruin their day if it doesn't go well, are almost meaningless. I mean, there obviously views are important, reach is important, stuff like that, but it's much less important than people give it credit for.
Yeah, I think the best thing you can do is hide your like count and like commit to not going back and like, unless you're like, okay, what's gone, like, you know, you want to do a quick review of what goes well, what doesn't go well, fine, like that's important, but obviously not every post is for engagement, views, etc., right? Hide all of that stuff, and then just post, and then just like, I can't like look at your metrics that matter. If you're a business owner, your metrics that matter are like client numbers, inquiries, conversations, like leads. And yet people get so hung up on, oh, well, unless if I post a bikini self, that gets more likes. Who gives a shit? Because it probably turns loads of people off that want to work with you because they like you because you're not flaunting, like, well, not flaunting, you can put your bikini up if you want, I do it. So it's not judgment, but like they like you not for that reason. But that got 2,000 likes because you're in a woman in a bikini, and that's what happens if you put that on Instagram. But I learned this the hard way because when I was kind of coming out of competing, I was still obsessed with obsessed with myself, and I was obsessed with my body. And so I was very strong-minded in that. I was like, I'm going to share my body because I don't feel like as a feminist, I should have to hide my body. But I'm also going to talk about disordered eating, and that can be problematic. But I was very much like, no, just because I'm in the body that I'm in, I shouldn't have to hide it. I spent a long time kind of flitting, like not quite sure where I sat, but being really strong-willed. And every time I posted a selfie, I lose followers. Every single time. And I'd be like, well, they're not the people that want to work with me anyway, so that's fine. And then over time, I was like, now that I'm not obsessed with my body, like I'll still post selfies or pictures of myself in a bikini or whatever. Um, I don't lose as many followers, and I think it's because people can tell that I'm not so self-obsessed. But I would be like, oh yeah, but my selfies get loads of likes, so that's really good. And you just are focusing on such the wrong thing,
Mhm.
like such the wrong thing. Look at your business metrics and
Yeah.
hide everything else.
And exactly. And I tell my clients is that um like it's very difficult behavior to get into, just post and then leave it alone. But essentially what I try and get them to do is not focus on the outcome of every single individual post.
Mm.
I get them to look at, okay, across this month, what happened in terms of, like you say, inquiries, new clients, sales calls, if you're doing them, et cetera, leads, email list growth. Did those things move forward at the rate we would expect? If the answer is yes, then whatever you posted in that month had a positive impact. Whether one posted terribly and one posted great matters not, because we moved in the right direction. Like you said, you then go back and maybe when you're thinking about, okay, well, what content do I want to create next? What worked well? Then maybe you're going to have a look at that, but you don't obsess about each individual post because like I posted two memes over the last maybe 2 or 3 months. So one of them got 2.5 million views. Now
What?
we've already kind of said like what a view might be. So
Lot of likes. That's a
yeah,
lot of
yeah.
likes.
It was literally a picture of a guy slapping another guy. But I put like a nice written caption. There was a call to action there, and so on and so forth. It generated zero leads, not one, not one. I then posted another meme, which was Ben Affleck doing the smoking thing outside and then talking about sales calls. That got shown to 4,700 people. So that was not a video, it was a post, but you could kind of take views and accounts seen as the same sort of thing. But that generated me 96 leads of that one post, right? And so if I'd have just sat there and gone, okay, that got 2.5 million views, so let's go make more of that, I would have been making more content that doesn't actually benefit me. Whereas what you want to look at is, like you say, is what matters. And I think it's like, I don't know, let's say, for example, you wanted to, let's say, lose weight for, I don't know, you were competing in a fight or whatever, and weight was actually a metric that mattered in terms of the pure number on the scales, but you measured something completely different to decide whether you were on track to meet your weight target. It's the same sort of thing, like, I don't know, tracking your, I don't know, ankle measurements or something like that. It's like it bears no relation to this thing. So yeah, I get it. I get it. I get it. Anyway, I'm going way off topic. I wanted to talk about something else you mentioned earlier, which was imposter syndrome. Because I literally wrote this question before we jumped on. Interestingly, like I watched it was actually a UFC fight, MMA fight, and the commentators were talking about this female fighter who was relatively new to the UFC, and they'd interviewed beforehand, and she felt like she said she had imposter syndrome. Like she didn't feel like she was good enough to compete at this level. And then one of the commentators, who's a very bright guy, very smart guy, said, "What's imposter syndrome?" And then they had this like real weird, like, well, these two women are just like punching each other. They had this conversation about what is imposter syndrome. And so one guy was saying, well, it's kind of like you don't feel like you're where you are right now. You don't feel like you earned the right to be where you are, or you're good enough to be where you are. And he was like, isn't that just a lack of confidence? Um, and then so he was kind of saying, well, are people just hiding behind a label and saying, like it's like they get out of jail card, is that, oh, it's a thing, it's imposter syndrome, so therefore I don't have to worry so much about it, or it's not on me to sort it out because it's a thing. And I just thought it was I'd never thought about it like as an interesting way of thinking about it. But I guess like leading on from there is I imagine you get people asking you a ton about imposter syndrome and in relation to business and posting social media content. Like, what's your whole view on imposter syndrome? What people can do to overcome it? What's the root of it, and all that jazz?
I remember hearing Adam Grant talking about imposter syndrome about 5 years ago or something like that, way before it then started getting talked about on things like big podcast names where everyone started saying the exact same thing. I think a lot of the people that say the exact same thing now, I think it all stemmed from a lot of Adam Grant's work. And I
Mhm.
highly recommend if anyone feels like they struggle with imposter syndrome to look at some of his work and his books. Um, but what I am going to say is probably not novel in that sense because it's been parroted so many times, is that I believe that it's a good thing. I believe that it's a sign that you're doing something brave, as opposed to you're doing something wrong, and you have two choices when you experience imposter syndrome. Because I do believe it's real. I remember seeing a psychologist talk about this years ago too, and he was like, it's more like an imposter spectrum rather than syndrome, and because
Mhm.
there's different facets of it, which was interesting. I don't know, I can't remember all the ins and outs of it. It was a long time ago. But the idea obviously is that you kind of feel like you've got there out of luck. And so it's, yes, the confidence kind of comes into it, but it's also that feeling of like it's all just could just be taken away from you like that. Someone's going to find you out. And when they find you out, that's it, everything's over. And so it can stop people from putting themselves out there because if you put yourself out there, you're more likely to be found out. So you're like, oh, if I just kind of play it small, I'm
Mhm.
keeping myself safe. That's not going to happen, or it's less likely going to happen, I'm less likely to fail. But every single person I know who has a successful business or has achieved what they wanted in life feels like an imposter at some point. And I used to be I'm very compassionate towards it because I've experienced it and I still do experience it. I used to be a lot softer in my approach to it. Whereas now with the people that I mentor, I'm like, great. This is great. You're feeling imposter syndrome. Amazing. This means that you're doing something new, you're doing something brave. Like let's channel it into excitement. How are you going to use it to your advantage? How are you going to build this evidence against that feeling of imposter syndrome? What are you going to do? I'm not here to say, oh, but you can do this and you're great and you've done X, Y, and Z. I'm not here to convince you that you're not an
Mhm.
imposter. That's not helpful to anyone. You have to be able to for yourself go, this is an exciting thing. Stop trying to get rid of it because you just put your energy into the wrong place and start being like, oh my gosh, I'm actually doing something wild and new and courageous, and this who knows where this could take me. And that's what imposter syndrome is. It's like this, it's like almost like a shining light, if you will, of like you're on the right path. And that's how
Mhm.
I really do believe it now. And I say this with someone who still struggles with nerves, still struggles with confidence, who still sometimes feels like an imposter sometimes. I'm not diminishing the impact that like the feeling that it can be. It can be hugely anxiety provoking for some people. And especially since I've got pregnant, I found that like I'm slightly more dysregulated. I'm trying to not blame the baby for that, but I'm definitely more dysregulated. And when I do talks and stuff, I'm like, oh, I've not felt this in a while. But
Mhm.
I really do physiologically, those feelings that come with imposter syndrome, sometimes there's like the day-to-day just kind of squashing of things, which you have to be aware of. But then there's also in the moment, I'm about to a podcast and I get really dysregulated and trying to kind of notice those somatic sensations and being like, oh,
Mhm.
okay, I'm going to soothe these because this is a sign I'm doing the right thing. I think it's just about self-awareness.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, and I would say that I've definitely experienced it and still do to a certain degree, especially when like I'm trying to. I've kind of like feel like I've got something new to say, maybe kind of think, well, maybe am I the right person to say this? Am I, do people want to hear what I've got to say? Should they not be listening to someone who's been doing this for 30 years or whatever? And like all those sorts of things um, still happen. But like you said, it's that kind of thing of, for me, is a little bit of pushing through that. And I always think that people who don't have imposter syndrome usually the ones who definitely should.
Yeah,
But
absolutely that. Absolutely
there you
that.
go.
But I
Um,
think too, don't you think too, like the more comfortable you get with messing up and being wrong, the the easier it is, like the easier it is to kind of get move through imposter syndrome because you're like, okay, well, you balls up. Okay, well, everyone does, and we're better at it now. But I definitely think in the fitness space, there's still, especially in the mentor space, there is just this lack of want to be like, yeah, I was wrong. or
Yeah.
a set to give out the wrong advice. So I actually try and embrace a lot of that. When I make a mistake, I'm like, I made a mistake. I can't believe I used to do that or say that. And I'm very say it without shame, or try and say it without shame. And that's one, to normalize it for other people, but two, for myself to be like, it's okay. There's no shame in being wrong. There's no shame in being wrong. That helps with imposter syndrome, because I'm like, if I do something stupid, I've done things stupid so many times before. That's part of my personality. That's fine. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to be like this eloquent, perfectly presented, never gets anything wrong person.
Mhm.
There are people like that, and that's great for them, but that's never going to be me. So I'd rather just not try
Mhm.
to do
Yeah,
that.
I think leaning back to maybe some of the things you said earlier about being authentic and you're being truthful and you're being honest. I've shared things, say for example, when I write my monthly newsletter about, like, I remember I did a whole issue about me trying something that completely failed. Like, I wrote 10,000 words on the fact that this was a completely bad idea. Um, but I'm okay with that. Like, I don't, I mean, I don't care. Like, I see it as like, I'm doing you a favor because you don't get to make the same mistake I did, because, don't do this for all of these reasons. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's a funny one, but I do think that a little bit as well, like we talked about, I deleted all the social media apps. And I think that's also helped as well. Because from a, let's say, for example, from a comparison point of view, I literally don't know what anybody else is saying. No idea who's saying what about this topic, about that topic. I originally did like when I wrote my book, I did a whole thing where I muted everybody, because I didn't want people, I didn't want to see something and say, oh, I should write about that. Oh, that's a good way to say it. I wanted everything to be my own thought, for good, bad, or indifferent reasons or whatever. And now, like, to the stage where I don't consume social media, I literally don't know what people are saying. So I haven't got that like comparison to say, oh, they say it better than I do, or oh, that was a point I wanted to make, but they've made it now, so I can't make that point. It's just a much more freeing thing to just go and I can give a crap what everyone else is saying, because often people come to me now and say, have you heard of this content creator? Have you heard of this guy in the fitness? No, never heard of him. Never heard of them. No idea. What are they doing? What crap are they saying? But I just find that a very freeing thing. And maybe it's a mixture of me being grumpy and all that sort of stuff. I don't know.
Well, no, do you know what? There's two things there. I scroll TikTok, I don't scroll Instagram. TikTok for me is one, at the moment, baby advice, feminist stuff, comedians, reality TV sometimes. Like
Mhm.
TikTok for me is that. If anything related to food, fitness comes up, I scroll past it really quick. So my algorithm doesn't want me to watch it. And do you know, since stories came out, I've probably in the last 3 or 4 years, I've really not watched stories at all. I don't watch stories. So like sometimes I'll check in on friends or people I've not spoken to in a while or whatever, and
Mhm.
occasionally, but I don't watch them because I'm like, what am I getting from this other than hearing other people's opinions that don't help me at all?
Mhm.
Or I compare myself, and it's not even just business stuff. I went through a phase where I wasn't obviously particularly happy in life, and I'd see all these people, having amazing lives and showing all this stuff, and I was like, this just makes me feel like crap. And I think just owning that. So it's not the same as like obviously muting people, but I just don't watch them anymore. And
Mhm.
I haven't for years, and I'm like, it's quite free. It's a free
Indeed.
place.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, I don't know. I often say to my wife is that I guess, like, is it imposter? I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it's a form of it. But I feel like, should I be a social media marketer? Because I really hate social media. Like, because I genuinely, like, if I didn't have a business that involves social media, I wouldn't even be anywhere near these apps, because I don't find them offering me any value of anything. Um, but it turns out I'm quite good at telling people how to use them. So it's like this, I always have this quite constant war in my own head that I don't like these platforms, but I can teach people how to use them. I just, yeah, I don't know. I have that kind of like, am I in the wrong job? I'm having a meltdown on my own podcast.
Just have skills in an area that, well, you do like it because you're obviously like the business side of it, or
I
like
like
the
I like marketing.
Yeah.
I don't, and I like marketing on social media. I just don't like what everybody, well, not everybody, but I don't like what 95% of people on social media think is marketing, or like tell people to do for their marketing. It just annoys the hell out of me to the point at which, like,
Yeah. I quite like it now. I quite like it. I've been through stages with that, whereas now, because I'm very intentional with my use of it, I genuinely, it's been a long time since I got value from social media. I get value from TikTok, genuine value. And I'm like, this
Mhm.
is great. Not so much from Instagram because it's all stuff that I already know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because my feed is business stuff.
Sure, sure.
Um, Sometimes I get value from your stuff. So I do get some value
Sometimes.
all the time. Except when you do a really high
Hey,
performance field, then
yeah.
obviously not. But everything other time.
I need to do more on that recaption stuff. Anyway,
I've
so
got one of
I'm
them
gonna
for tonight. By the way, I've got one of them for tonight and it's prepped. It's not because we've just had this conversation.
fair enough. So I'm gonna wrap up with the question I had listed second on my list, so which tells you that I've completely meandered off. And maybe I'll think of another one because it's going to be quite maybe a serious point to end on. We want to be maybe a bit lighter. Um, so I was thinking like when I was thinking about what to ask you and trying to get some insights into, and maybe ask you some questions that people haven't asked before. But I was thinking like in terms of men and women in work environments, there's a clear gender divide, pay gap, those sorts of things that are very real and present. When you started your business and as you've built that business, have you noticed a similar um, challenge or difficulty? Obviously, it's maybe slightly different because you are your own boss. You can decide what you charge and you can decide who you work with and all that sort of stuff. But do you feel like it's been more challenging to build credibility? Has it been more challenging to be taken seriously as an online coach, to get notoriety? How has your experience of that been for you personally?
So, yes, it's different. I think less so the financial side. I think that comes more from my own limiting beliefs as opposed to my gender, or my gender, I guess. But building a following, showing up online, that definitely gender has a huge impact on that. Gender more than sex, like in the sense of if it's changing a bit, but if you like look at anyone's explore page, man or woman, right, or other, and they go on their explore page, majority of things that are at the top of someone's explore page are naked women. And it doesn't matter what your algorithm is doing. You go onto the explore page and it's full of naked women. Mine is naked women. At least now they've been replaced with naked women with baby bumps, but on the whole, it's naked women. And because ultimately, social media will still push naked women and men with opinions. And there's this a concept called like the competency likability bias. And there's also like we have gender bias where women lose likability the more confident they are, and the more opinionated they are. And they can go into a room and they are immediately liked less if they have a higher pitched voice, more confidence. And so if you're showing up on social media and all of this business advice, like have an opinion, show up and like be loud, be like know what you stand for, be confident in what you know, it turns people off as a woman. Now, this is me generalizing, but there is research on this. It's not like something I've just come up with. And so I think it can be really difficult as a woman sometimes to try and find that because you need to be liked in order for someone to know, like, and trust you. Like is a key part of that. But you want to be authentic, and your authentic voice might be calling stuff out that's bullshit or having an opinion. But it's almost like you have to soften it in some way. And you'll see a lot of women do this, whether they do intentionally or not. They'll say, no shade to this person, but blah, blah, blah. But then you've got male people in the fitness industry or health industry, and they don't have to do that, and that's not their fault. But they'll happily, regurgitate reels, and we've got the Eddie Abu thing right at the moment, where every single person is calling out Eddie Abu, and I'm like, I cannot cope anymore. But like, it's very much just like this person calls out Eddie Abu, and Eddie Abu calls out this person, and you don't really get that so much with women. And one of the reasons, whether people, I think some people will realize this or not, is that that turns people off if you are a woman. And so it's not as great for your business. It might be good for engagement, but it doesn't build that connection. And especially if you work a lot with women as clients, um, that can dampen the connection. So it is more difficult to try and stand out and have an opinion whilst also being authentic, whilst also not turning people off, whilst also being a bit liked, but not being a sellout. And I do think whether people think about it logically in that sense or not, that definitely does have an impact. But a lot of the women that I work with who are coaches, they struggle to put their opinions out there. And there are not that many women that I look to that, Emma's prime example, business partner, best friend, inspires me so much. She's one of few women that I look at outside of my network of ETPHD coaches and business that I think you really inspire me in how you show up in business, or you really inspire me in how you show up on social media. The women that I know that have done really well on social media, not all women, but a lot of them, have all followed the same marketing strategy. They all look similar. They all do the same sort of content and regurgitate that, and it all kind of, it's boring to me, but it works. And one of the reasons it works is because they're not super opinionated, but they're softly opinionated. But there's also bodies involved, and that's great. Like, all power to them for that. But I think it can be quite hard to, if you don't want to do that, it can be quite hard to figure out what to say. And there's also an element of like, I've had quite a lot of backlash from people from various, whenever I have an opinion, I get backlash on either way. Often it's from women more so than it is from men, interestingly, but that might just be, I don't know why that is. So yeah, and we often sometimes will take it more personally. Again, I'm generalizing here, and see that as a reflection of ourselves and feel a lot of shame over that, and struggle to gamify it a little bit more. We struggle maybe a little bit more with the emotional attachment to it. So that holds us back. So there's various things. I think women, I prefer the voices of women than I do men. Like, I love women. No offense. I love
I'm
women.
taking up.
I just think sometimes it can be harder. It can be harder. And I think we all have to call ourselves on our own biases with this, of like, if you see an opinionated woman, why are you triggered? And would you be as triggered if you heard that opinion coming from a man? And because we all have this internalized misogyny as women, we all have this sex, like, there's just this unconscious bias that we all hold, that we have to hold ourselves accountable to.
And it's very much off topic, but related. Is that my wife had a interview for a job, and it was all over Zoom, and they, on like the fourth round of interviews, they did like small groups. There was a hiring committee, and then they kind of did small groups, like 2 people. And I won't kind of go into detail, but basically they looked at her social media, and these 2 women who were slightly elderly, shall we say, they're probably 70 and above, they had a particular problem with images that she'd shown of herself on social media. And I was kind of like, you don't show yourself like half naked or anything like that, so I don't get it. And it turned out we were in Portugal last summer, and she'd worn a dress that was just, a black dinner dress that was few straps, and but nothing like, whoa, my god, she's a hooker. Nothing like that. But they had an issue with that, and that was going to be a blocker for her getting a job. And my wife is very, very strong-minded, especially when it comes to any sort of feminist issue. And she basically called them out on it and said that this is your internalized patriarchy here, of you would never dream of saying that to a guy who was applying for this job and was on a beach, top off, in his swim shorts. You would never dream of bringing that up in an interview, but you brought it up with me because you have an issue with, what's of these various different sorts of things. I think it's sad that people have like let those things, or we as a society, of make people feel a certain way that they have to do certain things and fall into line in a certain way, which it makes no sense whatsoever.
Good
Um,
for her. Good for
yeah.
your wife. Good for her for saying that, because she's obviously, I think she's totally right. And I think the thing is too, and I think it's important for me to say, like, women in this space are so important, and you have so many strengths. Your ability to build connection and authenticity and things. And again, I'm not generalizing all women, but like, so on average, like, I think use your strengths, use like these, your compassion, your empathy, which a lot of men have and other genders have, is such a strength, superpower. So this kind of ties back into this first stuff we were talking about, when you're trying to follow these reels that do really well, or these influencers or whoever who do really well in a certain, with a certain language and a certain voice and a certain way of doing things. You do not have to do that, and it might do you a disservice. Lean into what your strengths are in your personality, and as a woman that might be opinionated and loud, and that's totally, like, go for it. But if it's not, don't be pulled into these people saying you need to be like shouting and do all these things, because it's not going to work for you. It's inauthentic, and you have the, like, that gender bias to contend with a little bit too.
For sure. And like I have some clients who are I wouldn't say they're shy, but they're certainly on the quieter side of things. And I often say to them is that, well, if everyone else is shouting and screaming, and then there's space for someone to have a little bit more of a calm and considered approach. Doesn't mean you can't share an opinion, doesn't mean you can't be forceful with that opinion, or it doesn't mean to say that you can't be direct and all those sorts of things. You don't have to jump around on the screen to grab someone's attention. And maybe whilst everyone else is screaming, the person that doesn't scream is the one that stands out. And again, like we said before, not doing what everybody else is doing is probably the ideal thing to start doing.
Absolutely.
So we are about out of time, gone slightly over. Apologies for that. So you have fitness coaching. You've got like an army of, almost like a small army of expert women coaches. So you do the health nutrition side of things. You've got your EIQ nutrition. You've got your um, mentorship. All these things going on. Like, most people listening to this will be coaches and things like that. So where should they go? How can they find out more about what you do and what you offer and all those sorts of good things?
The best place is probably listen to us, our podcasts. To be
Okay.
honest, we've got multiple podcasts. We've got the EIQ Nutrition podcast, where we talk all about coaching, nutrition stuff every week with Emma. We have the ETPHD Mentoring podcast, where we talk business stuff, again, coaching business. And then the ETPHD Team podcast, which is much more around relationship with food, body image, and health. And the websites and things are all linked in those podcasts too, so you can find out. The ETPHD website's got tons of free resources and stuff too, that you can get stuff from there too.
Perfect. We'll put some links in show notes so people can do the lazy thing and click rather than go search. But thank you very much, Emilia. Thank you for your time, and I'm sure we'll see you again soon.